Namaste and welcome to Nepal Conversations. Nepal Conversations is a podcast series where we talk to scholars and researchers about their interesting work on various aspects of Nepali society.
With this lecture series on Eurasia, we want to concentrate on the cultural editing processes of heritage. We ask how our elements of heritage jointly forgotten, erased, rendered invisible and neglected. This is why we're excited to hear Professor Kathryn S today, who has worked on Tamang song traditions since the 1970s, enough time to erase and forget some heritage. Kathryn S. March is Professor Emerita at Cornell University. She has worked on questions of gender, social justice, and change. If you're interested to read more, we recommend Kathryn March's study on women's life history narratives and song compositions in her book If Each Comes Halfway, Meeting Tamang Women in Nepal. It was published in 2002.
This episode will be presented in two parts. First part is a lecture by Professor Kathryn S, and second part of this episode is our conversation with her.
Namaskar, Kathryn. Thank you, everyone. Thank you especially to Stefanie Lauder and Pradhan, and to the Heritage in Placemaking joint project of SOAS, South Asia University, New Delhi, Social Science Baja in Kathmandu, and the Heidelberg Center for Transcultural Studies, and as well for the Nepal Conversations podcast. I'm really, really grateful for this opportunity to share a magnificent musical and oral tradition from the Tamang communities of what used to be called West Number 1, which is today the three districts to the north and west of Kathmandu, Dading, Rasua, and Nuakot. And especially thanks to the members of the community of Manigaon, where David Holmberg and I have worked since 1975, whose hospitality and generosity continue to this day, and especially to the songkeepers, Setar and Shelki Lambu, whose knowledge I want to share with you, and I hope to inspire others to help preserve. Tamang live throughout Nepal, but especially in the districts immediately surrounding the Kathmandu Valley, and are known as prodigious composers and singers of songs. When David and I arrived in Manigaon, singing and dancing were integral to every festival, to every aspect of life, and to every stage of those lives. Young people, among whom only a very few at that time went to school, spent long hours, days and nights, learning, composing, singing, and sharing songs. At festivals, whenever they could, they would compete late into the night, dancing and singing. You have been signed out because you are currently on another device.
Could you
I just say, okay.
close that?
Yep, there.
Thank you.
They were capable of singing for hours without repeating a line. Adults too sang and danced, as you can see in this image here, partly to mentor the youth in learning their songs, but also for their own purposes, to rekindle old friendships, to reconnect with places and pilgrimages and villages, and to enrich ceremonial and religious events. Religious, ritual, and song specialists who were keepers of the special songs traditions, including a group called the Gurpa, who sang to the divinities of the earth in voices as deep and resonant as the earth itself. Older people also composed and sang songs, personal laments called bom sang, which recounted the joys and sorrows of their personal lives as they began to confront their deaths. I have to make a confession here. I myself have had very little musical training, and I'm told, especially by David, that I can't even carry a tune. But it was impossible working in the Tamang community of Manigaon not to develop a very great appreciation for their song traditions. It was a very great sorrow then for me personally when the double impact of so many of the young people migrating out of the community into wage labor all over the world, and the years of political turmoil and violence made the villages go silent. Since these songs had not been recorded or written down, it looked like they might be entirely lost. So today I'm very eager to do two things. First of all, I want to share as many examples from these songs as time will allow. And then I will hope to show some of the ways in which the tradition is being preserved, revived, and transformed. When we were working in Manigaon, everyone said there were 5 categories of Tamang song, but I could not get anyone to agree on exactly what the 5 were. At some level, they were playful dancing songs, of which Mhendomaya is going to be the focus of this talk today, and Wara Wara. There were religious songs, particularly Namtar origin songs, and Manidora, dancing festival songs. People all said there were work songs, but everyone could only sing 1 or 2 of them. And there were sad songs, which in some other people's accounts, particularly Robert Desjardins, Cherlu, in Manigaon, they were referred to as bum song. And I want just to play a little clip of the bum song sung by the Jandari Lama in Manigaon, so that you get a sense of how different these song traditions can be. Even though I'm going to be focusing on the playful and dancing songs, I wanted to play a little bit of a sorrowful song at the beginning, and at the end I'll play one of the Manidora. All right. So these are the only songs. These are the only songs that are attributed to particular individuals. And in part 1, what I want to talk about are, first of all, what appear to have been generational progressions in these songs, even before we heard them. People would say, oh, that was my mother's generation singing, and that was my grandmother's generation. So I want to emphasize that when we speak about a tradition of song, it's a living tradition. It's a vibrant tradition. It was always changing. The fact that most of what I'm going to show you is a snapshot from the mid-1970s doesn't mean that it didn't change before, and it shouldn't mean that it shouldn't change afterwards. And the #1 hit from Manigang and the region on Pupri Ridge when we were there was a song tradition called the Sai Kole. Definitely had a give and take to it, with young groups of people singing, boys singing a line, girls singing a line, in which they composed complicated rhyming verses in which they tried to get the person they were singing with to reveal their identity while concealing their own. And in identity here, I mean whether you were marriageable or not. I also want you to notice in this picture the shama skirts and the way that they're being worn. The blue and red skirts just down to the middle of the calves. This was the dress that women wore on a daily basis in the community when David and I were working there. All right, so these songs are about love. So, The stew with rice is sweet. The sound of nice love is sweet. I'll go pick love's leaves to make a plate for you. If I don't find pretty love, what will I do? To eat a half measure of salt. How strange it would be if we didn't find love. The skill of singers in composing these verses was renowned, and some people were really well known for composing more verses of their own, and other people repeated and learned from older, more skilled singers. But it's important to remember at this time, everyone was potentially a dancer and a singer. There were watchers. There might be some people sitting around on the edges watching, but there was no audience. There was no stage. There was no performative. It was a totally participatory event. These were also sung at festivals where young men and women would literally face off, and these festivals can be very, very large. So large numbers of people who don't necessarily know each other are singing. And in this competition, then the women would go around with, at this time, either woven or crocheted turbans, which in the end, if they got bested by groups of men, they would have to relinquish to the young men, who then would go around for the rest of the night with their sashes and turbans on the top of umbrellas as trophies from the night singing. And the young men would begin singing with bamboo combs and beautifully made small bamboo treasure boxes, which they similarly would exchange with the women partners with whom they had the most successful song competitions. So that was sort of the hit song of 1975 to 1977. As I wanted to say in the beginning, there were traditions of it that preceded it. So older women in particularly would remember singing the dancing and playful songs of their youth. One in particular that was very popular was one called the Makai Pupi Wai, the corn popping song. The verses and the themes, will we find love? Will the love we find be sweet? Were similar. And you can see it, the singing style, besides the fact that it's much older women's voices, the singing style is quite different. The tunes are different, but the verse, and I've just given one example, the verses are often exactly the same. This is a song that was coming in just as we were leaving this. So the younger groups of women were starting to sing this one called Tek Soli Tek.
Changari kora chanlawa, chachabari chahoza, nita maya yalawe, tek soli tek, sari sanga sanglawa, chachabari chahoza, nita maya yalawe, tek soli tek.
And then the final example in this Mhendomaya series that I want to give you is from the song that had taken over by the 90s, just before the villages basically went silent because of the political violence. And this one is called Mhendomaya. You'll notice that even some of the exact verses are the same, going back to her grandmother, talking about the crust that's left behind in the pot when you make diro, right? That's what's going to be left of this wonderful sweet love that we're finding is all that's going to be left, the crust in the pot. The tune is different, the style of singing is different, but many of the themes are similar. You'll also notice that the dress is completely different. By this time, in the 90s, people had, on Puketi Ridge, people had stopped weaving the traditional blue and red skirts. And at this point, they were wearing market-purchased lungi from Malaysia or Thailand or India. But the tradition of singing in competition The tradition of singing all night long, the tradition of singing about love was still very vibrant. I want now to turn to the second part here and talk a little bit about the nature of discrimination. Although the Tamang communities were historically very close to the Kathmandu Valley, they were heavily discriminated against through in a variety of ways. But it produced situations in which, in the community we lived in, 46% of the children died before the age of 5. Almost no one went to school, and there was no possibility of using Tamang language in national contexts, in schools, on the radio, and other places. So one of the heroes of Tamang song traditions is Gopal Yonjan. Here's Gopal Yonjan becoming a major figure in the early establishment of Radio Nepal and later Music Nepal, and he has to sing in Nepali language. So he has to take all of this tradition and translate it into Nepali. He was trained in Darjeeling in classical Indian music, and he walks really quite an amazing line between these two things. Yeah. Okay, Changba means Tamang. It means it actually can mean either youngest girl or youngest brother or youngest sister. Here, obviously, with the young woman singing, she's singing to youngest man, right? But that was the only part in the song that he was allowed to keep in Tamang. It's almost as if he's singing out, Ramesh, or something. It's treated like a personal name, and its roots from Tamang. He also, the other song that I want to play briefly, because I think it underscores the contradiction on which the preservation of Tamang song traditions through the 1960s was perched, is he's also particularly well remembered for his patriotic songs. And again, show of hands, how many people recognize this one? It's beautiful, but very deeply influenced by classical Nepali language and some more South Asian language, or more South Asian musical traditions. Nevertheless, don't get me wrong, I don't want to say in any way, shape, or form that these patriotic feelings weren't very real. In fact, there were many Tamang who were involved in the first struggles to establish democracy in Nepal in the 50s. They were very, very hopeful for seeing more inclusiveness and more democracy, as we now talk about it today. And Gopal Yonjan is a really good example and a source of very great pride for Tamang people, as he should be. Also a very good example for reminding us of the repressive political backdrop against which Tamang song nearly disappeared. And in the 90s, ethnic resurgence was vibrant throughout Nepal. Ethnic associations like the Tamang Gedung were part of a nationwide, or maybe I should say nationalities-wide, ethnic pride movements beginning in the post-1990 and intensifying through the period of the constituent assemblies, and still at least in the Janajati communities today. The Janajati national anthem. For most of you, this is your generation, all right? Nepali songs have the longest. Okay, Hami Adivasi, Hami Janajati. You just even in a little clip, you get a sense of the excitement, the enthusiasm, the pleasure that people, communities, not just the Tamang, but certainly the Tamang and the resurgence of the Tamang Gedung, which had been around but had to be completely underground, and many other ethnic pride associations, some of them large and national and part of the National Federation of Indigenous Nationalities, and many of them small study groups of people exploring their history. The first International Tamang Conference in 2002, at which they composed, or for which they composed, what has now become the universal Tamang greeting. Let me tell you, no such greeting in 1975. Lasso, fiafula. Fiafulji was an expression in ritual chants about putting your hands together in respectful greeting for the divinities, and it has now become not only the universal greeting, but the universal song. You notice that everybody now has to carry the lyrics, okay? Nobody was carrying, well, nobody was literate, but nobody was carrying lyrics in 1975. At this point, becoming Tamang was an enterprise of rediscovery for many young people. And these international conferences were all about the codification of everything Tamang. They decided, for instance, that blue and red dress should be the national Tamang dress. And so all of a sudden, it's now for sale in booths at conventions. It's you can buy it out in Boda. There are whole shots. A jacket for the men, and which I had to bring especially for you all, the hat for everyone. Ornaments that previously had designated whether you were married or unmarried now just became Tamang. And booklets were produced, like this one here that is the Tamang Sanskar Sanskriti Nadashika. All of these things were produced so that Tamang would know who they were and how to be Tamang. All right. Needless to say, there were no booklets. Nobody was saying this is our dress until these kinds of things happened. And one part of this, the part that is most delightful to me in the context of this talk, is the resurgence of traditional song. The Mhendomaya Yuva Samaj, which was in part the child of a young man from Manegaon who came to David Holmberg's Saturday morning English language classes when he was 7 years old, and is now as a member of parliament from Nurkut, established this group called the Mhendomaya Yuva Samaj, along with a number of people who are still important in this. They released the first cassette of Mhendomaya songs in 2001, and a second one in 2004-05. It's right smack between the 2 years there. And some of the young people who are in this picture of this very first Mhendomaya Samaj are still the important singers, and you'll hear their names: Hemwaiba, Ramala Pakrin, Sagar S. Waiba. These people are still involved in preserving and promoting and transforming these songs. The first cassette, Mhendomaya, which means flower of love, was the first attempt at this, and it was the first time that Western Tamang songs had ever made it really into popular consciousness. They said it was a collection of legendary songs. It's perhaps not trivial to note in the context of this conversation that the songs on this tape were based on field recordings that David and I had made, that Bahadur Singh, who's now the parliamentarian, said he wanted to establish this singing group so the children and young people would not forget their Tamang song, but nobody knew them. Could he borrow our tapes? All right. So I feel not only a deep pleasure in these, but some non-trivial responsibility for some of this. What I want you to see, what starts to happen with this. Okay, first of all, they're coming out on cassettes. Older people aren't sitting around all night long teaching, but they're coming out on cassettes, and they're being performed in halls, and it's become a performance. So there will be a stage on which the organizers and the chief guests will be seated, and from which, from a microphone, a singer will sing. There will be dancers in a mid space, and there will be an audience. There's also the emerging importance of media in all this. Media, the proliferation of indigenous language radio stations, the growth of media in the sense that we also know it here, social media, YouTube. Just if you want to spend a wonderful evening, Google Mhendomaya on YouTube, and you will just, you have a whole evening's entertainment watching all of these things. Fashion also changed. The picture on your left is from 1975. It's two extremely beautiful young women dressed in all of their going to festival finery. And on the right is, in 2003, a similarly beautiful group of beautiful young women, also dressed in their finery, but there are transformations that would have been thought of as shocking. It was borderline indecent to have any of that upper blue showing on your shama skirt in 1975. Now, in order to get the skirt long enough to satisfy contemporary fashion, there is all the blue that's showing. And also, clearly, these young women on the left picture are not married, but they are wearing the large nali, these big cheptisun earrings that were reserved for married women originally. So there's the changes in performance, changes in fashion, the introduction of media, and yet it is still a very, very vibrant tradition. This is the second, by the time the second cassette came out, the people who produced it decided that they would include the lyrics in the notes, whatever they're called there, because the language by this time was really becoming very inaccessible to many of the young people that wanted to sing it. This Mhendomaya Yuba Samaj became a traveling dance company. They went, a whole busload of them went to the Second International Tamang Conference in Darjeeling, where they performed and, in some sense, taught the Darjeeling Tamang what it meant to be Tamang and to be a Tamang singer. So we move into a new period in which it's not just displaying ethnic pride and preserving a song tradition, but it truly moves into the popular imagination. And one of the most important people in doing this was a young man from Cowley, literally just up the hill from where David and I worked, who did a song called Cycle Kororo, okay? The wheels, how do you translate some of this, right? The wheels on the cycle go round and round, as my grandson might like to know it, all right? And where is it? Oh, here we go. And the opening refrain I put on here is, the train is expensive in Birgunj. Let's go by bicycle round and round. I asked your mother and she said, take her away with you, steal her away if you have to. And the girls sing, the train is expensive in Birgunj. Let's go by cycle. again, there are so many things that are so recognizable in this to me. The alternating chorus of young men and young women, the challenge of the young man saying, you know, come run away with me. My mother says I've got to bring her a daughter-in-law, even if I have to kidnap you. I mean, they're just challenging them back and forth all the time. It's the things that are very, very familiar to me, very much about love, very much also about abandonment, about being the crust left in the pot, about being, and these songs starting to be increasingly the woman left behind while the man goes off to work overseas. All right. So, but a great deal is recognizable in terms of what's done here. A great deal is not. So having it released as a music video, even a super amateurish one, is probably the most extraordinary piece of it. All right, so my last part here. As these changes have happened, as we went from what was a totally local, non-staged, non-amplified tradition of participatory singing and dancing through the pressures from national musical traditions and national media, through the liberatory practices of those same things and the rise of ethnic imaginations and popular media. The last sort of point where I want to leave, where it's sort of taking off from now, one of the most important things, of course, has to be the rise of Lochar. Lochar becomes a big deal. These young groups of people, the Mhendomaya Yuva Samaj, which became essentially a song troupe, a song and dance troupe, and is still, and another young man, Roshan Phuva, who established this group called the Lapsang Kharpo Music and Research Center, which is very, very self-consciously about preserving Tamang culture, songs, and they are prolific producing music videos and in fact, several full-length feature Tamang films. Lapsang Kharpo, and particularly another young man who has been important, it was part of the Mhendomaya Yuva group ever since its beginning, Yubi Mongresa, are composing songs that are very much based on ideas of cultural importance. So this is a song called Our Pong, the wooden jug that's used for carrying offerings in, that is a culturally central Tamang symbol. So in this particular one, they're very concerned with communicating what is central to Tamang, or what was central to Tamang culture, and preserving it. You'll notice that they now say there are 9 types of Tamang song. So the point in the how many is not to try to figure out how many kinds there are, but to recognize that song was so important in Tamang communities that there was a meta discourse about song, right? And about singers that is very, very important. This has produced whole new opportunities, and including in 2015, the first live Mhendomaya concert at the Nachka in Kathmandu. This is Roshan Phuva. Probably half the people in the audience can't understand him when he's speaking Tamang. It doesn't matter. They understand just enough, but it's important. It has become an important symbol that the songs, once again, be in Tamang, and that they be part of not only this preservation, but this popularization of things Tamang. This is not just happening in the big places, at big festivals and big communities, but it's happening in small villages all over as well. as communities get together to invite a couple of these singers to come out. But again, it has changed. It now looks a little bit more like the large ones as well. That is to say, there's a stage, there are singers who are amplified, there are dancers, anyone anyone can come up and dance. You'll notice now they're wearing the skirts long. These are still some village women whose mothers are still probably telling them, pull down your, don't let that blue show, right? And then all the people in the audience. And it still goes on late into the night. Okay. So in all these opportunities, what I really want you to take away from this, first of all, is a pleasure, a total pleasure in the singing and in the events themselves. I am deeply touched by the way in which this has spread to all parts. Oops, I went too far here. All parts of the world, as Lochar is celebrated now everywhere. And here in particular, I want you to watch this little clip, which is from the Dading Nuakot Society of the UK. And in many ways, the availability of things on YouTube, in the cloud in various ways for downloads, on cassettes, on CDs, has made it possible for communities as far away as the Dading Nuakot Society of the UK to mount festivals that remind the older people in their communities of the festivals of their youth, who provide some context for a very complex mix of nostalgia and cultural transmission in ways that wouldn't have been possible without the introduction of these more performative mediated opportunities. So international migration has created a whole new set of opportunities for preserving and transforming these song traditions. And I do have to make a quick note here. These singers, the singers and the groups that they're part of are taking very different positions vis-a-vis what it is they're trying to do. Are they explicitly trying to preserve a tradition? Are they trying to become as popular as they can and get as many likes as they can? Are they explicitly trying to speak to the new conditions of people's lives? One of my favorite YouTube videos is of that Cycle Kororo, in which one of the lines is, you left me on a winged thing going to Germany. And it's a Kola Tengbi Kumarche. It's the leaving a baby behind, calling yourself still a Kumar. You left on a winged thing going to Germany. All right. I mean, there's some pretty complicated emotions in that idea that you're being left behind with the baby and he's going off to Germany. So the positioning that these songs, that their performances they're doing multiple important things. They're continuing to be a source of pleasure and participatory involvement for people who identify as Tamang. They are becoming a context in which being Tamang can be performed for outsiders as well. They're becoming a context in which what it means to be Tamang is being transformed as people are moving all over the world. And these different singers and different groups are taking somewhat different roles in doing this. And it is something that I hope, if I do nothing else in this talk, but to encourage people to pursue understanding what's going on, I will have succeeded. I'm really grateful for this chance to share these songs with you. I'm grateful to the SOAS collaboration on Heritage's placemaking and to the Nepali Conversations podcast. I'm grateful most of all to the people of Manigaon and Pukri Ridge, and to the singers, songwriters, musicians who are each in their own different way, both preserving and transforming this great Tamang musical heritage. And as I said, I will end with the song. This is a Dora, Mani Dora. I have to teach you how to dance to this, so if we do this one.
Commissioned music for this podcast has been produced by Vayu Audio Studios. Composer, music arrangement, guitar, Tunna, sound mix and master, Vayu. Mada Dime Damaha and percussion, Kunan Singh. Bamboo flute, Anish Mahajan. Recorder, Jaco. Bass guitar, BK. Cello, Sense.